Microsoft's orbit was made possible by a Saturn V booster called IBM.
In February 2026, a report came out that should have been impossible. Microsoft's own engineers, the people who build Windows, Office, Teams, and Edge for a living, were quietly told to stop relying on Copilot, the company's flagship AI product, and start using Claude instead. Claude, made by Anthropic. A direct competitor, the company that had spent 3 years selling Copilot as the future of work, was internally admitting their own people didn't fully trust it. Here's the thing. This didn't surprise everyone, because back in 1995, in a PBS documentary
Hi, I'm Steve Jobs.
called Triumph of the Nerds,
I know Bill would get upset with me for saying this, but of course it was true.
Steve Jobs sat across from journalist Bob Cringely and told the world exactly how this would play out. Almost nobody took him seriously. Now it's 2026, and the bill has finally come due. Let's be precise about what Jobs said, because this isn't vague criticism. This was a diagnosis.
The only problem with Microsoft is they just have no taste. They have absolutely no taste.
The only problem with Microsoft is they just have no taste. They have absolutely no taste.
I don't mean that in a small way, I mean that in a big way.
And I don't mean that in a small way. I mean that in a big way.
In the sense that they don't think of original ideas,
In the sense that they don't think of original ideas.
and they don't bring much culture into their product.
And they don't bring much culture into their products. He wasn't just insulting them, he was explaining why a company with that much money, that many engineers, and that much market dominance would eventually hit a wall. Because dominance built on copying and distributing, not on original thinking, creates a ceiling. He went further.
I have a problem with the fact that they just make really third-rate products.
He called their products third-rate. He said what saddened him wasn't Microsoft's success. He acknowledged they earned that, but the fact that their products had no spirit in them. They were, in his words, pedestrian. And then, in a separate interview for Wired magazine in 1996, he made the most specific prediction of all. Eventually, Microsoft will crumble because of complacency, and maybe some new things will grow. But until that happens, until there's some fundamental technology shift, it's just over. He used the phrase fundamental technology shift. In 2022, that shift arrived. It was called generative AI. When OpenAI released ChatGPT in November 2022, Microsoft moved fast. They invested $10 billion into OpenAI and embedded the technology into Bing, into Windows, into Office. They called it Copilot and rolled it out everywhere, in the taskbar, in Settings, in File Explorer, in Teams, in Edge. On paper, this looked like the opposite of what Jobs predicted. Microsoft wasn't crumbling, they were leading. Satya Nadella was everywhere, talking about AI-first transformation. Analysts called Microsoft's OpenAI bet the most important tech investment of the decade. The stock climbed, the headlines were glowing. But underneath all of that, something was already off. Microsoft's approach to AI looked exactly like its approach to everything else. Take someone else's technology, integrate it deeply into existing products, and distribute it through enterprise contracts. It worked for Office, it worked for Azure. They assumed it would work for AI. The problem is, AI isn't a feature, it's a platform, and you can't copy your way to platform dominance. Here's the data people keep glossing over. Microsoft reported 20 million paid Microsoft 365 Copilot seats in their Q3 FY 2026 earnings call in April 2026. That sounds like a big number. And CEO Satya Nadella pointed out that the number of customers with over 50,000 seats had quadrupled year over year. But context matters. Microsoft has over 400 million Office 365 users. 20 million paid Copilot seats out of 400 million users is a 5% attach rate 3 years into the AI era, with billions in marketing and a built-in distribution channel that no other company on Earth has. For comparison, Microsoft's annual revenue run rate for its AI business hit $37 billion in Q3 2026, growing 123% year over year. but the vast majority of that is Azure AI infrastructure, not Copilot itself. And the user feedback has been consistently lukewarm. Copilot got rolled out to File Explorer, to notification panels, to the Settings app. And then, quietly, those integrations started getting pulled back. Microsoft scrapped plans to bring Copilot to notifications and settings on Windows 11 in early 2026, walking back features they had publicly demoed just months earlier. Windows Central described the moves as Microsoft trying to reduce AI bloat across the OS. This is not how a successful product behaves. This is a company testing things it wasn't sure about and retreating when they didn't land. Now, let's talk about the Claude story, because this is where Jobs' prediction becomes impossible to ignore. In January 2026, The Verge broke the story. Microsoft had instructed engineers across its core AI team, its Experiences and Devices division, the teams that literally build Windows, Office, Teams, Edge, and Surface, to install Anthropic's Claude code and use it for their daily work. Not as a casual experiment, as a serious pilot. Engineers were expected to use both Claude Code and GitHub Copilot and submit comparative feedback. The company also greenlit Claude Code access across all code repositories for its business and industry Copilot teams. It even encouraged non-technical employees, designers, project managers to use Claude for rapid prototyping. Here's the brutal irony. Microsoft owns GitHub Copilot. GitHub Copilot is supposed to be Microsoft's answer to the AI coding revolution. And yet Microsoft itself is telling its own engineers to test whether a competitor's product does the job better. Internal data from early pilot programs reportedly showed engineers using Claude for nearly 60% of daily tasks, with self-reported median productivity gains of around 50%. If your own employees prefer the competitor's product inside your own walls, what does that tell you? It tells you that integrating someone else's technology isn't the same as building something with insight. Jobs saw this coming. Taste isn't decoration, it's the capacity to understand what people actually need before they can articulate it themselves. Microsoft has always known how to distribute. It has never consistently demonstrated the ability to invent. If you zoom out, the story of Microsoft is a story of remarkable business execution built on a shaky creative foundation. Windows wasn't original. It was inspired by the Macintosh GUI, which Jobs famously said Microsoft copied without understanding. The tablet PC came years before the iPad, yet it failed because Microsoft shipped it with a stylus and a desktop OS. Apple shipped it with a finger and a purpose-built interface. According to Scott Forstall, iPhone co-inventor, it was Microsoft's tablet PC that pushed Jobs to start the iPhone project out of genuine frustration. He called Microsoft's engineers idiots for not realizing that human fingers were the natural interface. Zune versus iPod, Cortana versus Siri, Bing versus Google, Surface versus iPad. In category after category, Microsoft arrived with a technically capable product that nobody particularly wanted to use. It wasn't about engineering talent. Microsoft has always had extraordinary engineers. It was about the gap between engineering and vision, between building a feature and building an experience. In 2010, a former Microsoft VP named Dick Brass wrote an op-ed in the New York Times saying that Microsoft had become a clumsy, uncompetitive innovator. He wrote that the company had not just failed to develop a system for innovation. It had, in his view, developed a system to thwart innovation through internal politics, competitive fiefdoms, and a cultural allergy to anything that wasn't Windows or Office. Jobs said it in 1995. A Microsoft insider said it in 2010. The Copilot story is saying it again in 2026. Now let's address the second half of the title, the part that says it's too late. To be clear, Microsoft isn't going bankrupt. That's not the point. The company reported $82.9 billion in revenue in Q3 FY 2026, an 18% year-over-year increase. Azure is growing fast. Their enterprise cloud business is deeply embedded. They are not in danger of collapse. But too late means something more specific. In the AI era, The platform that developers build on, that users trust, that defines the default experience, that platform is being decided right now, in 2025 and 2026. And Microsoft is not winning that race on the merits of its own products. Google has Gemini, which is built into the world's most used devices. Apple has its own on-device AI and the most loyal premium user base on Earth. OpenAI, despite its partnership with Microsoft, is increasingly operating independently and has its own consumer products and enterprise relationships. Anthropic's Claude is being adopted even inside Microsoft's own offices. Meta's open-source AI models are giving enterprises a reason to build independently of any cloud vendor's proprietary stack. Microsoft's advantage was always distribution, getting its technology into every enterprise, into every office, into every school. But AI doesn't follow the same rules as software licensing. AI is chosen based on quality of output, trust, and experience. You can't lock someone into a Copilot subscription the way you could lock them into Office. They will switch, and they are switching. Jobs said Microsoft would crumble because of complacency. They haven't crumbled, but they are being bypassed. The fundamental technology shift arrived, and instead of originating something new, Microsoft did what it has always done. It licensed someone else's breakthrough, wrapped it in a familiar interface, and called it innovation. That playbook has a ceiling, and in the AI era, that ceiling is lower than it's ever been. Jobs' word, taste, sounds soft, like an aesthetic preference. But he didn't mean it that way. Taste, in the way Jobs used it, means the ability to understand the full human experience of using a product. Not just whether it works, but whether it feels right, whether it earns trust, whether it makes someone's life better in a way they can feel. Copilot doesn't feel like a product born from deep understanding of how people work. It feels like a feature that was engineered to monetize AI at scale. There's a difference between those two things, and users feel it even when they can't explain it. The iPhone didn't just make calls. It redefined what a phone was. The Mac didn't just run software. It changed what it felt like to sit in front of a computer. Those products came from a team that obsessed over the gap between what was possible and what was actually useful. Where is that obsession at Microsoft? It's not in Copilot. It may not be anywhere in the consumer layer of the company at all. Their deepest competence is enterprise infrastructure, Azure, Active Directory, SharePoint, teams for compliance-heavy organizations. That's real, and it's valuable, but it is not platform-defining in the age of AI. The companies that will define the AI era are the ones that can make people feel something when they use the product. That instinct doesn't scale by acquisition. You can't buy it from OpenAI or license it from Anthropic. It has to come from inside. And 30 years after Jobs said Microsoft didn't have it, the evidence continues to suggest he was right. Steve Jobs called it in 1995. Microsoft had no taste, no original ideas, and no culture baked into its products. He predicted that a fundamental technology shift would expose all of this. That shift arrived in the form of generative AI. And what did Microsoft do? It licensed someone else's model, packaged it as Copilot, pushed it everywhere, and watched its own engineers quietly switch to the competition. The company isn't dying, but the window to define the AI era is closing fast, and Microsoft is not the one defining it. Jobs was right, not about every detail, but about the part that mattered most. The thing that would eventually cost them wasn't competition from outside, it was the absence of something from within. That absence has a name. He called it taste. If this kind of deep dive resonates with you, subscribe. There's a lot more where this came from.